Hi guys, welcome to the review of the Feiyu-Tech G3 Ultra 3-axis gimbal. This is the aero version. Some of you may have already seen the handheld version review that is actually on Feiyu's website from me. Now, I've been testing this with an Alien 560 quadcopter running DJI NASA V2. The reason I'm using this is because it has the rail system, and at the moment there aren't many easy ways to mount this gimbal without using the rail system. So people who own Phantoms, for example, at the moment don't have an option. So what I'm going to do is basically I'm going to talk over the footage, so you can look at the footage, you can see what's going on. As you can see, the way that I've done this is I've got one main camera, which is the Hero 3, sitting in the gimbal, and I've also put a Mobius camera stuck behind it, so you can really see how choppy the footage would have been had we not been using the 3-axis gimbal. Now, I should mention at this point in time that the Alien 560 that I'm using, number one, the configuration with the centre of gravity is pretty poor, so it doesn't fly very well, and number two, I've noticed that one of the motors had a slight lean on it, which means that it was yawing when I didn't want it to. For the purposes of this test, that's actually perfect, because as you can see from the mini footage from the Mobius, this thing was not a very stable thing to fly. So actually we're really giving the test of what this gimbal can achieve. Now, one of the main things that I was looking for in my testing of this was the classic problem that some of Feiyu-Tech's gimbals have had, which is things like roll drift and vibration shake. Now, when I say vibration shake, I don't mean things like jello effect caused by bad prop balancing and vibrations through the frame. What I mean is the mini shakes that come from the anti-vibration dampeners. The 2-axis gimbal that I've had terribly soft anti-vibration, and that was causing major shaking. This particular model has got much better from the point of view of those little vibrations, those mini shakes. It's not perfect. I would still argue that there is too much shake for what I would like to see, compared certainly to something like a DJI Zenmous H3 3D, but it's certainly an improvement, and I think with a little bit of work I could probably stiffen them up a little bit and actually give some really good footage with it. From the point of view of roll drift, I'll explain what that is for those who don't know it. Roll drift is simply looking at the horizon, and when you yaw around, how well that horizon stays locked in place. You can see as I'm spinning around now that there is a little bit of a drift at the moment. Now, it's not really bad, but it's not, again, quite up to the standard of the DJI Zenmous H3 3D. Now, it's a little bit harsh to compare it to that, because the H3 3D actually links into the IMU of the flight controller, so it knows the motions that are about to happen before they even happen. This gimbal has an internal IMU on the gimbal. It has to wait until it feels that before it can react. Now, that isn't to say that it shouldn't be compensating a little bit faster, and the other thing I should mention is that this is flying on the standard firmware. I haven't done any firmware upgrades. This is just the version 1 firmware. There's already been at least 1 or 2 releases since then, and obviously I'm going to do some further videos later on to actually do a comparison of any improvements that's happened. So with that in mind, let's talk about the other little niggles that you've got. Mounting is going to be one problem unless you've got a rail system at the moment. You can create something of your own. The good thing with this is that the mounting plate has no power distribution. There's nothing about that is going to cause you a problem. You could literally remove the mounting plate from this and hard fix it to anything. To be honest, as I've said on the unboxing video, they missed a real trick, Feiyu-Tech, because if they had just adjusted some of the screw holes, they'd have been able to mount it directly to a DJI Phantom 2 on the original fixing plates, but sadly you can't do that, and it hangs a little bit low, unfortunately. Anyway, for the purposes of this, it works with the rail system, and it works fairly well. The other problem that we've got is that I am flying, as many do, a DJI NASA V2. Now, the V2 means that it's using channel 1, 2, 3, 4 for general flight, but it's also using channels 5 and 6 for its various functions. Now, the issue that you've got with this particular gimbal is that to change flight modes, so you've got the 3 flight modes. You've got the standard mode 1, which is what I'm flying in at the moment. You've got mode 2, which means that if you pitch the craft forward, the camera will in fact also pitch forward, so it will start looking at the ground. And you've got mode 3 where there's a heading lock mode, which means you fix your camera on the point you want to look at, and no matter what you do with your quad, it will try and stay fixed on that. That can come with issues anyway, and it's not a mode that many people are going to use, but the point is that's got a single channel to allocate a switch to flip between those modes. All good. You then of course need your pitch mode, which means that you can actually adjust the camera forwards and backwards, so you can point it down towards the ground, you can lift it up, you can do all of that. Normally you put that on one of your dials, you could put it on one of your switches. Again, that's got a separate channel. Then you've got the issue that there's actually the heading following mode where you can adjust that on a potentiometer. That again uses another channel. So ultimately this gimbal, if you want to get its full functionality, requires 3 separate channels available on your receiver. If you're flying on a DJI NASA V2 and you've got yourself a nice Futaba radio like I do using S-Bus, you're going to be limited to 8 channels. Now a lot of those Futaba radios like mine, I've actually got a 14SG. It's a 14 channel transmitter, but I'm going to need hardware from Futaba to actually create the ability to actually use all 3 of those additional channels. So it's a bit of a shame that they've done this. They you know, a clever interface would have been better that allows you to use 2 channels to flip through them. But anyway, it's not going to cause a major problem. Most people are going to fly in the mode that I've got right now, which is just the standard mode, whereby if you yaw your craft around, it will gently compensate for that yaw and point the camera in that direction. If you move downwards, it will stay fixed. So if you pitch your quadcopter forward, it will stay in a fixed horizontal location. The horizon should stay fixed. From that point of view, it does very well, and I have to admit I'm very happy with it. For the price point, it's pretty good. I think they're dicing a little bit, because if you are a DJI owner, you are still, in my opinion, better off with the H3 3D. However, this is a very good option for people who don't want to use the DJI, or if they're using an aircraft, for example. You could fix this to a large aircraft like an X8. You could easily do this with other quadcopters. You can also mount this in the opposite rotation, so it's sitting on top of an aircraft, and that's something you simply cannot do with the Zenmous. But other than that, as you can see, the footage is pretty reasonable, I would say. It's stable. When you look at the comparison of what this quadcopter is actually doing at this very moment in time, it is pretty locked in. This was not a stable flight by any means. There was a good gust of wind everywhere. The props don't work particularly well, the ones that I'm using for this particular craft, so I think it's actually proven itself to be a fairly capable unit. So the next thing for me to do is going to be to actually update the firmware, get some flight testing with it. I'm led to believe that the firmware itself will improve the roll on this, so there's going to be less roll drift. The other thing that it's going to improve is actually the sharpness on the yaw, and that's something that people have had problems with on the handheld version of this gimbal. When you actually yaw the camera around, the problem is that it will stop quite quickly, and then it will try and compensate for it. The net result is that you get quite jerky footage, and obviously the one thing that we want to avoid when doing any of this is to have jerky footage. So that's going to be something that's going to need some looking into. But other than that, I think it's a very good gimbal. I think, like I say, for the price point, it's pretty reasonable. It's got all the controls. You can do your basic stuff. You want to be able to change your modes, and you want to be able to change your pitch. Most importantly, you want to be able to pitch your camera down, look up, and you can do that. As long as you've got 8 channels, you can do that with pretty much any flight controller. Things like the APM, for example, that won't have a problem with it either. But you know, you do need to take that into some consideration when you're doing it. The other thing that I really like about this gimbal is actually powering it and actually fixing it to any aircraft. It's one servo lead, gets you power. There's no distribution board, there's no extra boards, it's all encapsulated. You've got the 3 cables, and they literally are just servo cables. So all you need to do is get yourself a 12 or even 14 volt output, so it will cope with 4S. You just need an auxiliary output from your battery, or plug it into your balance point. You just put that into a servo cable, you plug it in, and you're away. And you've got that option straight away. You can just get it in the air, and that is a very nice thing. if you've got the rail system to be able to mount it. So hopefully from this point onwards, hopefully what Feiyu-Tech are going to do is take a look at possibly getting it available for the Phantom. Whether they do that or not, I'm not entirely sure. I'd argue that they probably won't, purely for the fact that if you own a DJI Phantom, you're most likely going to have the DJI gimbal for it, and rightly so. So it's really a case of what other options they can do with the firmware, whether they're going to do any improvements of it. But for the moment, I would say certainly this is good value for money. In the UK, it's a little bit more expensive than I think it should be, based on its competitor. But ultimately, it's very solid, and most importantly, as you can see from this footage, it's very resilient. And I think that is a point that's well worth mentioning, because the DJI gimbal, for example, the motors in it, they're very small. They don't cope well with wind. They won't cope at all. They certainly wouldn't cope if you put it on an aircraft, and that's not even an option to you, for a fixed wing aircraft, I mean. And this will really take a bit of a beating. I did have a glitch out on one of my test flights where one of the cables, which you can see in the bottom right hand corner, when I rotated it too far, when I was pitching it down, it actually snagged and it caused a glitch out, which was a bit of a shame. So it's worthwhile bearing that in mind, on how you do it and the actual pitch mode. But other than that, I think it's a very capable gimbal. So as you can see, we're just coming into land now from the point of view of the footage. It's not the most beautiful of places and not the most beautiful of weather, but I think that's given us a good indication of what you can expect from the gimbal. And hopefully this has given you an idea of whether or not you fancy buying it for your multi-rotor or your aircraft. Stay tuned and obviously subscribe, and you'll be able to see any updates that I do, any further videos, and anything that I tend to do for the Feiyu-Tech stuff. So thanks for watching.